Welcome to this episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Eric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a ton of kids.
We have 6 kids total. He has 3 and I have 3.
My name's Hallie and I love riding horses.
I'm Lexi and I love agriculture.
My name's Carter and I love eating.
My name's Chase and I love lifting weights.
My name's Summer and I love spending my parents' money.
I'm Dane and I love baseball.
Our show is about our blended, blessed, and always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we are in, that by sharing our story, all the fun and all the mess, the challenges we are experiencing, it will give you some inspirations, laughs, and community, knowing you are not alone in this mess.
We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's dive in.
This episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess is sponsored by the second book in HP's legacy children's book series called Are You With Me? In this story, a mama bird has to make a big choice to fly towards her fears or stay in her warm, comfortable nest. As parents, we know this world can be a scary place for our kids. Bravery is a gift we can help them choose. Are You With Me? Is a beautiful story based upon the author's real-life experiences. It's a great way to start a conversation with children about being curious and brave. Pre-order Are You With Me on our Blended, Blessed, Always a Mess website today. Welcome to not just this week's episode, but a new season of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess, season 4. And one of the things that Angie and I really want to do this year is to expand the podcast to continue to help other people in their journeys, because obviously this podcast for us has been a healing resource after we've lost Hallie. And so we want to be able to do that for other people, because I think the most joy that we get from it is when we hear from other people that have lost a child like we did with Hallie, but there are lots of tragedies that go on throughout the world. And so a couple of years back, we heard from Caitlin Love, who had lost her husband in an accident. And so we thought this year we would start off by helping another, hopefully being able to help somebody else in their journey. And so Angie, I'll let you dive into that.
Awesome. Yeah, it is definitely the year to spread our wings, but also bring more stories and more volume to other people's voices, because my gosh, we have learned so much from this, and a lot of feedback we get from our listeners is they've learned a lot as well. So we are going to introduce Jill Wood to our podcast. So Jill and I ran in similar circles, but we never really connected. Her husband actually helped get a loan for one of the houses I bought years ago. And so we knew of each other, but never really truly connected until tragedy strikes. And I think that's when bonds and connections are formed, and you feel like you see each other without even saying anything. Like I see your post, Jill, and I feel what you feel, because there's this knowing, right, of when you know people have went through such hard and tragic times. So thank you first and foremost for being willing to come on our podcast and talk. I know it is hard to share your experiences. And I know we've talked about this for a while of like, hey, we want to share what you've gone through, but also waiting for the right time. And now it's the right time. So thank you for being willing to chat with us. So I think first, I'll just turn it over to you and share your grief journey, because I know some people that listen know probably who you are, but then we have a lot of listeners that don't know your story.
I was married to my husband, Chris, for about 3 weeks short of 20 years. And we have 3 children. Our oldest, Ty, is 20 now, a sophomore at Mizzou. Madeline is a senior at Jeff City High School. And then Brody is a freshman at Jeff City High School. July of 2023, our lives changed forever. Chris was very active in the community, and he was just a person who just fed off the energy of others. He was kind of crazy and enjoyed people and being out there with people. And so he loved to love people. He took care of people and was just a really good person. And in July of 2023, it was just a really rough season for him in his workspace. And I could tell that it was different, but also was kind of helpless as to what to do. But he'd had a meeting on Thursday, July 27th, and we'd kind of discussed the meeting. And I really felt like we walked away from that conversation. I remember where I was standing when he called me. I remember what time it was. And we discussed a plan moving forward, a plan that involved, a potential job change and what that would look like and kind of long term what that was going to be like. And I walked away from that conversation feeling really good about it, thinking we're in a good place. And so we went on about our day, but I knew enough that he wasn't doing, like, I knew he was still bothered by it. So I had a friend who worked at the bank go see him. I was like, hey, just go check on him, whatever. So he came home that evening and we were having a friend's 40th birthday gathering at our house. So there was probably 15 people that were over there, just friends and kids. And I do know that he primarily talked to all of them about work and just the struggles. And so that was his primary focus that evening. We still had a good time, but my parents were coming into town and my aunt and uncle were coming into town. My brother had a promotion ceremony the next day, but we'd gone as far as to Chris had said what he wanted to wear. I'd ironed his shirt, gotten everything ready for the next day. He had a certain lapel pin he wanted to wear that day. So that was all ready. And I had a 9 a.m. meeting. He had a 9 a.m. meeting. So we were going to work for a while and then pulling the kids out of school to go to the promotion ceremony. So everything was pretty good. It was probably 11:30 p.m. when everybody left. And Chris was out in the garage messing with some stuff. And I tried to get him to go to bed and he didn't want to. He was working on something. And I was actually kind of mad. I was like, seriously, like, let's just go to bed. But with the extra guests in the house, everybody was kind of spread throughout the house in different places, kids sleeping in different locations than usual to give up their bedrooms for guests, and went to bed, woke up the next morning, and Chris had never come to bed. And so when I got up, I actually just went and brushed my teeth and thought, fell asleep on the couch or whatever. And I almost got in the shower, and then I was like, I'm going to go see where he is. So what seemed like an eternity of searching. And we were in the process of buying a duplex across the street. So there was a lot of places to look. And I didn't find him easily, but I thought I was going to find him on the couch or somewhere. And I phoned a friend because I was like, hey, did he come over? Like, did he walk over to your house? And, we were having a good time. That would not have necessarily been unusual or whatever. And no. And then I found him and he was dead. And I don't remember if I was still on the phone with my friend or if I called her back, but she and her husband came over and kind of got everything going into motion. And I remember my one concern, she'd called 911 and I knew that people were coming, but I made her call them back because I was like, got to make sure that sirens aren't going to be on because I don't want the kids to wake up to this. And so she did, and they came quietly. And Madeline ended up waking up in the process, but the boys slept. And so just waiting for, there's already people, because we live on a kind of a main street. And so there was already phone calls and all the things just due to all the emergency vehicles in front of our house. And so just trying to find the right time to go let the boys know. And it was becoming like there were so many people at the house that I had to go tell them. And I don't think there's a worse thing than having to wake your child up to that. So, but you get it. And really, we had so much support and love and all the things, but I just don't think that there would have been times maybe that I would have thought that was a possibility in different phases of our marriage, but this wasn't really one of them. So from there, we went through all the typical processes and just tried to get back into life. Ty left for college a couple weeks after that, moved into Mizzou, and kids got back to school. And, I have the best boss and workplace. They supported me, and I just was home for about a month or so and then got back into work. I think the one thing that I did in the process was I kept saying, okay, well, in 3 months, I'm going to be better. Mm-hmm. Or in 6 months, it's going to be better. Or, I kept giving myself these deadlines because, well, I do like deadlines. I tend to be a procrastinator, so deadlines really help me. But it was always like, I'm going to be better and we're going to be better. Mm-hmm. And it never ceased to amaze me that the wheels just kept falling off over and over and over. And I thought, really, how much more can we actually take?
Yeah.
And, this year hasn't been different in the sense mm-hmm. that challenge after challenge. Yeah. So I did finally stop that. Like, you know what? Mm-hmm. there's no deadline to getting better. There's no deadline to getting normal. You know, I've learned to kind of have a love-hate relationship with the finding a new normal terminology, because I'm like, normal
it's gone.
Like implies that you've done it numerous times or it's regular behavior or something. And I just don't think any of that's actually realistic, or it's many years out.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I am so sorry that that happened to you and that you lost Chris and that you and your kiddos have to figure out what each day looks like. I think you are spot on with how frustrating it is to think that it is going to get better, because there's hope initially, right? And I don't want it to sound like it's, you know, Debbie Downer, people are listening and just starting going through this process. But I do think the process is you think, okay, I just have to get through this and then it'll get better. And then you reach an acceptance mode, which is probably where you're at, of like this acceptance of this is what it's going to feel like all the time. Now what do I do with that? Now that I know, and I'm not always looking and searching for something to make it better, now what do I do? And I love that you are willing to talk about what happened, because I think that is when you reach that acceptance mode of like, okay, like this is not fixable. There's nothing that's going to come along or something that someone will say or, you know, a certain thing that happened that will make any of it better.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's kind of like, how do you turn it then and try to find some beauty in all of the pain? How do you turn that hell that you've went through and experienced and what you saw that you will never forget, ever forget it? Like, I'm sure if we're have the same experiences, I replay over and over what happened. I replay being there when Hallie passed away. I replay walking into the room for the first time. I replay all of it. And I think that will never go away. I'm sure you replay having to tell your kids and just, but isn't it kind of amazing how our bodies are wired though too, of like how you can logically think through in that moment of trauma of like, oh, I need to call them back and tell them to be quiet when they come in. Like, but you're in such a trauma mode too. Our bodies, I think, are amazing how you think you can't get through something, but you do because of how your adrenaline and just how you're processing everything.
Yes. I remember asking, I don't remember what I was wearing. I have no idea. I was like, oh my God, was I out there in my robe? Like, I really honestly don't remember what my friend told me or the answer. I'm guessing that I was, but I was like, did I cross the street in my robe to go look in the duplex? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't remember certain things, but I remember the things that mattered the most, like no sirens. I got to get to my kids, like all of those things. And even, as there's been traumatic things that have happened since that we've had to deal with, just different things. And it's almost like you get better at it. And that sounds really bizarre, but like, I just remember people being like, you didn't break. You just were stoic. And like, and you do eventually, but maybe in a quieter place. Where you take a couple days and are like, okay, I'm exhausted, I haven't slept, and it's time to just lay in bed and process.
Yeah.
I think what
you learn how to break better, right? Because we are all broken. You go through something like this, you are completely broken. But to your point, I do think you learn how to cope with it. You learn how to navigate it. You learn to listen to your body when you know it's time. It's time to go lose your shit in the bathroom, for however long you need to, or go rest, whatever that looks like, you get experienced.
Yeah.
When I had no idea, I don't know like kind of your experiences up until this point, but like for me, I never went through something so traumatic. I've never lost anybody close to me. Grandparents, that is not the same. You know what I'm saying? And so I had no idea. I didn't even know how to deal with ashes. Like, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Just so many things. I had no experiences.
There's no prep for.
No.
Let me ask this question. Go ahead. And then I'll ask you a question.
I was just going to say, I was listening to your guys' podcast even before Hallie passed away and then still listened after. And I do think that was good for me to some degree. Even when Angie and I met and had coffee, I remember being like, when am I going to stop being so tired? Like,
Yeah.
She still asks that question. So we're farther in. We're about 6-7 months advanced of me. She still asked me that question just last week. When am I going to stop being so tired? Well, let me ask.
Another acceptance. Like, it's another thing of like, makes me angry sometimes.
Yes.
Of like, God, I'm tired of carrying this.
It's frustrating.
Yes.
We haven't used the dirty word yet, so I'll be the one that does that. But when it comes to, we've not had this scenario on our podcast before where the word suicide does come into play. So for you, Jill, what does that word now, what kind of meaning did that have before? What does it have now? And then what do you want people to know about suicide? It's an uncomfortable word, but when you're living it the way that you are, how do you handle that? Is it something where it forces you to be able to use the word? So I asked you a lot of questions there. I can go back, but let's just go back to your previous experience with the word suicide, then where it went, and now where you are.
So Chris's father died by suicide. And that was something that he didn't talk about. I remember we'd been dating for a while and he never talked about his dad and talked about his mom, talked about his stepdad, but he was just never addressed. And I remember, I don't even know if he told me at that time. I mean, he told me that he had passed away, but I don't recall whether he actually said what happened. But it took several years, I think, for me to learn. And several years into marriage to fully learn what had happened. And I know that had a huge impact on him. The longer we were married, the more he talked about it at different times as things happened that, made him think of something, or when he was processing, sometimes he would talk about it. So I didn't have exposure to suicide in a direct way until just through him. But what I observed is we don't talk about it. And I do remember us having a situation where he got mad because I had told the kids, I think the older two, what had happened, because they were asking from the standpoint, like, did Grandpa Larry pass away of like cancer? Or not a good liar. Like, it's just not, I don't really have it in me. And so I think I explained to them. And I think when Chris found out, he was really upset. And now later he came back and he was like, you did the right thing. I'm sorry I got so mad. But it was just something he didn't want them to have to deal with, which is unique considering where we are right now. But
yeah.
So then, having experienced this, I've really come to the conclusion that I don't know what the right answer is about anything. And I don't have answers, but I do know that I observed my husband want to not talk about it, not acknowledge it. It was embarrassing, or whatever the stigma you want to associate with that. Or is it that one of us did something wrong, or, was whose fault, or, it goes to those places. But that didn't work well for him, clearly, because here we are. So yeah. I've just said, I'm going to talk about it, because I'm not saying that that's the best answer or the right answer, because I don't think that probably exists. But I want it to be something that other people can talk about. And I will say I've had numerous people reach out to me via social media and just say, I don't know how you're doing what you're doing as far as talking about it, but thank you, because I can't, or my parents won't, and it's a sibling or whatever the situation might be. And so they don't feel like they're able to because other family members don't want to. And I mean, I guess I'm left to lead this household, and I want it to be something that, and I know that it makes my kids uncomfortable sometimes, but I always go back to, I'm doing this because I saw what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right in a lot of ways. And what you're saying about the not talking about it is what the devil feeds off of that, right? Keeping you in a lonely place, covering you with shame, because shame is the thing that tells you
I'm bad. Like we can know that we've made a mistake and know that that's not who we are as a person. We can overcome that. But if you get stuck in a cycle of shame, that's more of an alone feeling because you don't want to share that with somebody because you're feeling so much pain and I'm such a bad person and no one's ever going to forgive me or love me for whatever those things are. And that's what I think shame does. But when you bring these things out to the light, then you give other people a chance to wrap their arms around you, to help you to see that there is another side of these things. And so I think when people do commit suicide, they feel like there's nobody that's going to help them. There's nobody that's willing to listen to their pain, that's willing to go into the pain with them. And I just think what we have found is that there's a lot of people that are willing to go into pain. Man, that's what I think we've been created for, is to go into the hard places with other people.
And I do think that so many more people struggle than we know until we are willing to talk about it. And I've had a lot of people reach out and say, I know you're the last person that I should be reaching out to right now. But they do because I'm talking about it or I'm not hiding from it or whatever. And I mean, even Angie and I connecting and getting together and having coffee, like I know she was still struggling. I just wanted to see like, what does hope look like 6 or 7 months down the road? Like, and I wanted realistic, because so many people would say things like, oh, if you think year one's bad, wait for year two. And I'm like, who says that? Like, I don't know that I want to know that right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they weren't wrong. And so I just think that people naturally gravitate to people who are willing to talk about it. And sometimes after I've done a post where it's a little bit more raw and vulnerable, I'll get a lot of feedback. And a lot of times that puts me in shutdown mode for a period of time. Like I'm not able to then respond to all those messages for a period of time because it's just too much, but I will eventually. So I want to help people. Sometimes my capacity is a little bit limited.
Yeah.
But
boundaries. I mean, I do think no matter what, it's healthy to have boundaries and know what you can take on and not. And I think the reality is there's so many people hurting in the world, and anything that you feel passionate about, being brave to talk about it, regardless of what people think about it, allows other people to feel like they're not alone. I've been an advocate talking about narcissism, and some people don't like that, but it also lets other people know that if they're in a crappy relationship, they're not alone. And the same with suicide. Like, I do think there are so many people struggling. And I imagine if you post, people probably try to connect, or it's a worried parent about their child, or like, how do you help them? And I think, though, that also allows for connection and for people to go, okay, I'm not the only one struggling with this. And I agree with Eric on the shame and fear side of it. Like, I think those two emotions, everybody carries at some level of capacity. Like, I carry it. I carry aspects of shame and fear and all the things. And I think the more awareness that we have out there, the better people can feel like they can talk about it. Because I do think that's a lot of the challenges we all face, is just feeling comfortable enough to say what we're really feeling without worrying about what someone might think about how we're feeling. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You know, I remember being scared to go to the grocery store or leave my house because I was like, what are people saying about us? Like, what do they think about us?
Fishbowl.
Like, do they think that, you know, I remember finding out later that somebody was like, well, their marriage was kind of rough, huh? And I was like, what? Like, actually, we had a typical marriage that had good years and bad years and good seasons and bad seasons. We were probably,
which is a real marriage.
Yeah, that's real.
That's a real marriage.
It was rough at times, but it was really fantastic at times. And I would say that the last 2 years I had with him were some of the best. We went on 4 vacations the year before he passed away, and we were able to do things we hadn't done before. And it was a great time. And we were kind of looking forward to empty nesting and different things. Like, we were in a really good place as far as our marriage was concerned, but I was still scared of what people were saying and what they were thinking. And I know that it really bothered my kids that, you know, like, what's wrong with your family that this is what happens? And I just think that all of us have issues. Like, and even I I can get a little weird about the whole mental health thing. Like, I mean, I have mental health issues. I'm pretty sure. Like, I'm slightly like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I do. I struggle with depression. It runs in my family. And so,
We say
it's one of
all the time. Like, I want to normalize therapy.
I go to
Because
therapy. We all do.
everybody needs to have a therapist. Everybody,
Yes.
because life is hard. No one has it figured out. It's hard for everybody. And you have to have some sort of lifeline, whatever that is. Maybe it's not a formal therapist, but a mix between someone you can be able to open up and share your feelings, your faith, all the things. Like, there's a tool set that every person needs because it's hard. It's hard.
100%. I should have been going to therapy long before this. Let's be honest. I'd probably be processing this better or quicker or whatever. But I'm just saying, like, any of us could fall into a pit like anybody else and not be able to find our way out. And to hear so many people tell me, I've been where he was, and I want you to know that he loved you and your kids more than anything in the world. I have a hard time completely understanding that, but it helps for them to tell me that.
Let's talk about the aftermath of suicide then, because you mentioned your kids obviously going through a hard time. I was 27 when my dad had a heart attack and died. My baby sister was 17. She was still in high school. So you still had one going off to college and then two younger kids at that time. What's it like for, obviously I know it's really hard to lose a parent at that young of an age, but it is different in that, my dad died of a heart attack. I carried a lot of guilt that I could have done more for his health, which was dumb. But, in this scenario, how do your kids handle losing a parent and all the feelings that come with that, the emotions that come with? Maybe they don't even share with you, but like, I can imagine for me, I would have been like, could I have done more? Could I have done, what is this? And
I think it's been a challenge for all of us. And I don't think that it's different than any other type of death from the standpoint of the bargaining. Like, I could have done this or I should have done this. And I mean, even other friends and people I've seen in the community were like, oh, I saw him on this day and I could have. So we've all dealt with the bargaining for sure. And I think that's a matter of processing. I think some of us do it better than others within our family. I just mean myself and the kids. For Ty, one thing that's been a challenge is just the transitions of all of us had to kind of sit in the house and feel the difference for those months that followed. And, we went from a bustling house of 5 with 2 teenagers that were driving, going in and out, and people always around, to, with Ty leaving and going to college, a house of 3 where it was much quieter. And I had much more quiet time before I had to go do pickups for practices or whatever. It was really hard. There were times where I would take one to practice and Madeline would get out of dance at 9:00 and come home to a dark house. That had never happened before for her. And to hear how traumatic that was for her was hard for me. But then for Ty to come home and walk into this space that we've adapted to as best as possible for breaks or weekends, that's really hard. And we'd all sat in it and lived in it. And watching that be hard for him and not being able to do anything about it. I think that, you guys can heavily relate to that. Like, it's one thing to watch your kids struggle. It's another thing not to be able to do anything about it.
Yeah. Can't fix it. Can't fix it. I think one of the things that I've struggled with lately, I don't know if this is different with a husband versus a child, but like, you don't want people to forget them, right? There's that aspect of like honoring their life because they lived and they mattered. But one thing that I have noticed with my kids lately is they don't want to talk about it as much because they're kind of ready to move past it. Like, they don't, and that doesn't mean forgetting Hallie, but like, they don't want to be defined by that. They don't want to be the kids that lost their sister because someone, didn't know how to use a gun. They just want to move on from it. And there's a part of me that I struggle with that a little bit because I think it's that saying, like, as long as you love that person, you will always grieve them. And they're just, kids are different in how they handle situations. And so I think, like, as moms, and a wife, you're like hanging not hanging on, but like I want to hold that close to me because she was my daughter and because I love her and all of that. And they love her too, but they are you experiencing a little bit that where they want to sort of go on with their life, and it's hard to find that balance between keeping their memory alive, but also starting something new?
Yes, I think it's really hard. And I think that it probably is a little different with spouse versus child for sure. But at the same time, like, I know what Chris brought to the world. So I very much don't want people to forget what he was about and who he was and how he cared for people. I mean, Chris was a lot better at a lot of things than me. Like, I was always very home focused and he was very outward focused. And we just balanced each other in that way. But I don't want people to forget the good things. But each kid tends to process that differently or want to handle it differently. Mm-hmm. And that's even really difficult because one's okay with one thing, but the others are not. And I feel a strong, I don't want to say obligation, but just to honor him in different ways at different times in a way that's acceptable to them and meaningful. And that's really, really difficult because I don't know if I'm planning something that they're going to hate or not want to do. Mm-hmm. And if we try to talk about it, usually I don't get a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
And you just kind of are like, okay, well, we're just going to roll with this. And therapy's helped a little bit, like with the 1 year, like just do something so that you're not just sitting in it.
Yeah.
Which we all went to Big Surf and took a bunch of friends. And so it was just a distraction. And, you know, like Chris's birthday is next Saturday. And so I was like, okay, I'll just get some lanes at the bowling alley and we'll all go do something. And I'm like, I don't want to make them do something they don't want to do, but I don't want them to think that I've forgotten about their dad or forgotten about what day it is, or it doesn't matter to me, because it does matter to me, but it matters to me for them first and foremost.
Yeah.
It's just a really tough balance to please everyone. And I've learned too that I'm not going to get it right.
Yeah. Same. Yeah.
So true.
I made a lot of mistakes, even just the whole like grieving process. And our kids now like make fun of us a little bit of like, oh, that must be a sign from Hallie, because we talk about that all the time. And I'm like, okay, so now I've like started when something does happen, because we always have weird stuff happen. I'm like, okay, do you think I'm crazy? Do you think this is a sign or not, or no?
I just keep it more between me and Angie now because we're both good with it. So I'm like, I know I'm safe if I share it with Angie. If I share it with the kids, like, oh, geez.
Well, we don't know what we're doing. I mean, this is new for all of us. It's new we're going to make mistakes because I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Right. Well, and I've said to my kids, I've said something, they're like, I don't really want to know about that, or I don't really want to hear about that. And it's like something that's significant to me from him. And I'm like, okay. But I feel like on a different day, the answer could be different. So I'm just like, whatever. I'm
going to take a moment and I'm trying to lighten this difficult podcast and just say, kids, we love you. But also sometimes kids are assholes. Okay. Sometimes they just are. We love you. Yeah. And teenagers is such a hard time. I would say somebody the other day was like, oh, my toddler, it's so hard. And I'm like, wait till they're teenagers. You're going to wish they were a toddler at that point.
Because they're trying to have their own lives. And that's like the phase we're in right now, is like, how do you still keep that? I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. But
for me, it's like now they're at an age where you want to spend all this time hanging out with them because they're super fun. Like they're able to, and they don't want anything to do with you anymore because they're at an age where they don't want to hang out with you. And all those memes online are so true about you send like this nice text to your child and it's like dating someone that's not interested in you. Okay. And they're just like, okay. And that's what it is. Thanks.
I think, and Jill, maybe you're in the same situation. I think why that's super hard for me that, now the twins are driving and they're off doing their own thing. And I'm also have more time that I didn't have before. But it scares me because they kept me going. Like, I'm sure you're in the same situation. Like, your kids kept you going, where I'm sure you want to stay in bed all day. That's what my default is like. Oh my God, I have to get up and another day of fighting through this. And that part they want their own life, but I'm almost like, I still need you because you keep my heart going.
Yes. Well, and I have found, and it's been an adjustment. I think for the first, 7 or 8 months, I didn't really want to go do anything. I felt like I needed to be right there if the kids needed me. And they got used to really liking me being right there.
Mm-hmm.
But then I kind of realized, like, being here makes me sad. This is a sad space. And as they should be, they're doing their own thing. We're all in the same house. One's gaming. One's, they're not, it's not like they're hanging out right next to me. So it's gotten to where I really fill my schedule with being gone. And that's been a little bit difficult for them at times. And I'm just like, guys, it's not that I don't want to be here with you, but being here with you looks really different at this stage of the game. It's basically being lonely again.
Yeah.
And I don't mean
right.
that mean. Brody's like my sweet one who comes and checks on me. And if it's just he and I at home, I could be hanging out doing something. And if I weren't there, he'd be fine, right? But he'll come and check on me because he knows that I'm in my lonely space because it's just me.
Yeah.
He recognizes. And so filling my schedule and just finding things because, what am I going to do when they're all gone? I mean, it's just different.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. How do you feel like people should support someone when they've lost someone to suicide? Are there things that you loved that people did or the things that you wouldn't suggest?
I don't know that there's any uniqueness to suicide in that aspect. I remember people would get a house cleaner for me for a period of time. That was like a really helpful thing. People still checking in on a regular basis, and even people remembering the days that are important to my family so that you're not alone in it is important. I think one thing I've noticed is more for the kids, sensitivity to, and I think it's more of there's an immature aspect to it, right? So things kids say that are insensitive that they don't realize they're doing, right? So you do bad on a test, well, I'm just going to kill myself. Or that can happen with any form of death. You just make comments and you don't think about them. But I've had to try to explain to the kids, like, they're not even thinking about. No. And I think the kids can think, well, how can they not think about? Like, how do they not? And they don't. Or even, I remember one of the kids talking about a coach or somebody saying, we're going to run suicides. I ran suicides.
Didn't even think about it. Yeah.
Like, who thinks of that? I cannot think of it in that context, even hearing it, just being like, oh, those are terrible. Did you survive? Yeah. I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of the way my children are hearing it. And so just some level of self-awareness to those that are closest to them. Not everybody, people are people. We're human. We make mistakes. Nobody is going to cater to us. So we have to learn to give people grace. People are giving us grace on this journey. So people aren't going to remember all the things that might trigger something for us. And sometimes we can't even verbalize our triggers until we're triggered. So I went to New Year's Eve at my mother-in-law's, and I was, nothing different, like did it last year. Don't really remember last year, but going to do it. I walked in the door and instantaneously went to the bathroom and just lost it. And there's just different triggers and they hit you at different times. And I was texting a couple friends being like, talk me off this ledge. What is wrong with me? Like, tell me I can do this.
But that's the question, what you just said. What is wrong with me? That I think is the hardest thing with grief. I do it too. And in triggers, we're 2 years in, and the other day in church, this mom was in front of me and had like a maybe 8-9-year-old little girl that had long blonde hair. And all she was doing was like rubbing her hands through her hair. And I almost got up and left church for a minute because I don't know why. It just reminded me of Hallie had beautiful hair. And I always mess with my kids' hair when they were younger, braided it, or, just all. And it's just like so many thoughts run through my head, like, oh my God, like I can't cry in the middle of church because I saw someone, what's wrong with me? Or I think, oh, I wish that mom would like treasure every moment. You know what I mean? Because you you take things for granted until you've lost someone, and then you have this whole new realm you live in where it's like you appreciate every moment because tomorrow's not promised for anybody.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the most frustrating is now you're in this new world where tragedy can happen and tomorrow's not promised, and it's like this awakening that you live in. And it's some days that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. Like, do you ever look at pictures of yourself prior to when you lost Chris and go, God, look how like joyful my smile was in that picture. And then you look at yourself afterwards in pictures and you're like, oh, I can see the pain.
Yeah.
And like some days I just want to go back to who I was before because I was naive. You know what I mean? Like you lived in a different world, it feels like.
Completely different. And the things that you just like anybody, you take it for granted. And yeah. I do think that I live life differently and more intentionally now. And so if I'm giving of my time, or even if I'm not giving of my time because I'm trying to find some rest, like it's intentional. And so everything is harder. Everything. Making a phone call is harder. Sending a text is harder. Typing an email at work is harder. So if you're on the receiving side of any of those things, it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I see that. I feel that too. It's like if you get my time, you matter to me.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Let's ask you this. As we start 2025, Jill, and a new year, people try to hope. It's like New Year brings hope a lot of times. What is something on your plate for hope, maybe a mission that you have for 2025 as you continue this journey forward?
I mean, that's a profound question that you would think I would have a profound answer to, and yet...
Not necessarily.
No, Maddie's graduating in the spring, and so I know that that's going to take up a lot of time, and she's got a lot of decision-making ahead of her for school next year and is still undecided. So that kind of just leaves us in a little bit of limbo. And, I think that I want to continue to spend time with my friends and hopefully find ways to help other people who are struggling in the space that we're struggling with. And just to kind of even touch on what sharing like we're doing today does for other people. I went to Hobby Lobby to get some wrapping paper over the holidays, and I ran into a girl that I work with, and she was like, oh my gosh, you're here. I can't believe you're here. And I thought, well, I'm just getting wrapping paper. And she's like, but you're the reason I'm here. And I'm like, so strange. And she's the sweetest thing. But she said, I remembered your post from last year and how hard the holidays were and slamming doors and how awful it was. So one of my friends lost her husband the same way your husband died. And we're doing 25 days of Christmas for her and putting something in her mailbox every day.
Aww.
That's sweet.
Of course, started crying and was just like, okay, that's a good thing that came from me sharing something that was uncomfortable, because nobody wants to talk about how miserable it can be within the four walls, right? Because it's gross. And then I had another time recently that I was at a parade downtown, the Christmas parade, and someone stopped me and said, you've saved my life twice. And I was
wow.
Like, and she said, I know where your husband was, and I've been there. And I've been there more than I'd like to think. And he loved you and your kids more than anything, she said. But when I get to that place, I go back and I read your aftermath post and think about what you said that did to your family. And we're not through it. We're not done with it. It's not going away. But I hope that my children can see those things that happen, those people that we touch, even if it's just one or two, that we continue to do that. And that helps us heal.
Is your mission around suicide awareness, who's your focus? Is it for people that are struggling to have them hold on? Like there's people around you that love you? Or do you feel like it's more directed to the families that have maybe lost someone? Or is it both? Like when we talk about suicide awareness, what does that mean to you personally?
So I think because Chris died by suicide, and shortly after, Ross Steiner, who was a friend of ours, died by suicide, and then Jason Schumann not long after that. And then my son lost a close friend from high school to suicide in January. And it just kept happening. And I think that that's where my aftermath post and thoughts came from. It was like, for the love of God, stop.
Right.
Stop. All you are doing is taking all of your pain, multiplying it, and throwing it onto everyone who loves you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that Chris loved us enough that that's not what he wanted. And I know that's not what he was thinking. My logical mind knows that for whatever reason, he thought he was doing us a favor. I'm here to say he couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'm very passionate because I've seen. And so my heart breaks for every one of those families. I think about them constantly. And there's been more since.
Yeah.
And there's even a guilt associated with that it's like, do people think we're okay? Like, do people think we're good? Like, are you doing this because you think that we're thriving? Because we're surviving.
Hanging on. You're hanging on by a thread. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really like a call to the people who are struggling. But with that being said, I also want to be there for people who are the victims and are remaining. And I don't have answers. I don't have solutions. I don't have a lot. But I can sit with you and I can cry. And I can walk with you.
I think that message of taking the pain and multiplying it and it lands on all the people that love you is probably the most painful, beautiful thing we've had on the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that message alone, if anybody is listening, like hang on to that, because you have an army of people around you that love you. And I do think that that is what people think of, like, better off without me type of thing. And it is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. I've even, just being completely honest on here, like, I've thought like that would be worse than someone taking my daughter's life in some aspect, but also you don't know, like you can't imagine. I can't even imagine what it's like for you. I only know my own grief and my own experiences. So that heaviness I feel anytime I hear someone lost their life to suicide, it makes my just stomach turn. Like I just ache for the families, because that aftermath, like I can be mad at one person and be angry at one person because they are at fault for what happened with my daughter. But like navigating that with your entire family, I just can't imagine it. So my heart always just breaks for people in those situations. But your message is a beautiful message because it's from the pain, right? And with love.
Well, and what I would say is my situation is not ideal, but I've often thought the same in a vice versa way, that loss of a child would be the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
So it's all different. I think the one thing that's unique about suicide is that someone actively chose to leave. And there's a lot to wrap up in that for those that are left. But at the same time, never have I doubted his love for any of us.
And this might be too personal. We can edit it out, but I'm curious too, like, did he leave you a note or anything? Or
he did
anything?
not.
He didn't.
He didn't.
Do you at times wish he would have, or?
I think the kids would have liked that, maybe.
Yeah.
I think because for them, there's more questions. I think that I was just so tuned into him and all of his things that I've never even really been mad, because I know how much hurt he had.
Yeah.
But I've found some moments along the way that I'm screaming and yelling and cussing at him, saying, are you not watching this shit show? Because where are you? Like, why are you not helping me?
Yeah.
And so I think for them, but I've also talked to other friends who have now walked in my shoes as well. And they've said that if there was a note in their scenario, that it wasn't very helpful. And I think probably if you think about it, for somebody to be in that mental place, you're probably not giving the best information anyway.
Right.
That's fair.
That's true. That's true.
Well, I think what you said a few minutes ago, as Angie said, some of the most profound things that we've heard as far as what you think you're doing something to help other people, but really you're leaving a lot of problems behind. And so I think that's a great message to kind of close on today. But before we let you go, we appreciate your time. We do always talk about one thing that we're grateful for. And so I'm not sure which one of you ladies would like to go first today, but I'll let you fight over it. And then
I'll let Jill go first if she wants to.
Oh, I mean, I'm so grateful for, there's not one thing, but just my kids that have kept me upright. And I have the best crew of people surrounding me.
You do.
And my boss and my coworkers and everybody who's made something terrible not as terrible and walk alongside me every day.
Yeah, you do have a beautiful army of people and great kids. You have great kids.
So do you. And I always say Chris built the army because he was the social one, and they're just here lifting us up. So he took care of us in his own way.
I would say today what I'm grateful for is this platform, even though we had technical difficulties to get started, but just a platform to be able to connect with other people and be able to amplify their voice. Like as hard as these conversations are, I always leave feeling more connected with people, with humanity, because none of us are really that much different. You know what I mean? I think sometimes we get into situations where we feel like, oh, everybody else has it figured out. And it's like, no one has it figured out. Like, this is hard for everybody. And I'm just grateful that we started this podcast way before we met tragedy, but that we can continue conversations with people, because it helps me too, not feel alone in my own grief journey. And obviously I appreciate you, Jill, being willing to talk about Chris and your story, because I do believe it will help many other people.
Well, I think you're the one who I at least recall, I don't know if you actually coined the phrase, but just finding purpose in the pain makes it bearable. You just want to help other people.
if she didn't, we need to trademark it right away.
I don't think I did, but I remember reading it somewhere. I'm like, God, that's it. That's it. What else are you going to do?
Yeah. I'm just going to say that I was really grateful for this community as well. We didn't talk about that because it's allowed us to really build an army of people in this regard to help others. But I'm really grateful for the time that Angie and I have had down here at Hallie's house in Florida for the last several days. It's been kind of a good place to reset. Our kids are going to be down here in the next couple of days to join us. And we've just had a few days to kind of have some quiet, have some relaxation, to reset. And the more I study things, and this goes for you too, Jill, when you're going through difficult times, if you don't do the rest part, the actual physical shut it down and rest your body, rest your mind, it does prevent the healing from happening. And so I do think that it's been nice to rest a little bit, and that helps us in the healing so that we can then continue to give, not only heal ourselves, but to give back to others. So that's what I'm grateful for today.
It does. And Eric, on that note, I just want to say one thing. You guys asked, one thing people can do for people who've lost someone to suicide. The one thing I will say is you do become an instantaneous single parent without anyone else. And so a lot of times I do need to get away for a night and just not be the responsible person. And I don't mean I'm relatively still responsible, but when I say that, I just need to not be the person who's answering all the texts and calls. So if you know someone in that scenario, one thing you could do is let them have a night every couple weeks where they can just be away and regroup.
And wouldn't you say forcefully almost, most, probably more of a female thing. It's hard to let someone come in and help you sometimes. So you almost have to, if you're looking for ways to support someone, I 100% agree. A night off, absolutely, because you're grieving. You're also a mom. You're trying to wear all these hats, and you also need to take care of yourself. You almost have to make it happen for that person. because my guess is 90% of the time the person will be like, no, I'm okay. I'm fine.
You
versus
do.
saying, this is what we're doing. This is what's happening.
Yes. You need someone like my friend Holly who just says, okay, kids, you have to call me tonight. Like if you need anything, mom's off tonight, whatever. But you need somebody who's just going to come in and say, look, this is what's happening. Turn your phone off. Go do what you need to do, because it really does get you to a better place.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, guys, thank you both so much. Jill, we appreciate your time today. The conversation was fantastic. And hopefully we can help others that maybe are dealing with some of the same things.
Yes. Thank you guys.
All right. We hope you. Thank you guys for listening to episode 1 of season 4 of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. We hope you have a wonderful week, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at blendedblessedalwaysamess.com.
Reach out to us on any of our social channels. We would love to hear from you. Have a great week.